For 11 months, Marcus Bellamy walked past me every morning at 10 to 7, and in all that time he never once looked at me. I know because I counted. Not out of bitterness, counting is just what I do, the way some people hum. 231 mornings, allowing for his travel and my rota. 231 times a man said nothing to a woman polishing the glass he was about to walk through. He wasn't cruel about it. Cruelty would have required noticing me first. He came through the revolving door of Bellamy Medical Systems with his coat over his arm, whatever the weather, phone in his left hand, security pass already out in his right. A man who had removed every 3-second delay from his life and mistaken the result for time. The lobby staff called him the ghost because you felt the air change before you saw him. The young ones were frightened of him. I wasn't frightened of him. I'd spent 34 years around machines worth more than my house. I knew the difference between a thing that's dangerous and a thing that's just running hot. My name is Iris Cole. At the time I'm telling you about, I was 63 years old, and I cleaned the 3rd floor and the basement level of the Bellamy building in Birmingham, 10 at night till 6:30 in the morning, 4 nights a week. And I was, though not a soul in that building knew it, very probably the most qualified person on the payroll to be doing exactly what I ended up doing. But that comes later. Stories should be assembled in order, like anything else you want to hold together. Here is what the ghost never saw, walking past me. A widow in a green tabard, sensible shoes gone over at the heel, hair the color of solder. Here is what I saw, kneeling at the glass with my cloth, 231 mornings. A man of about 50 who took the lift 1 floor rather than the stairs always, who pressed 2 fingers flat against his breastbone when he thought the lobby was empty, the way you'd check a wallet was still there, who had a chauffeur but gripped the door handle for a second before letting go, every time like a man rationing something. I saw a scar's white edge above his collar once when the wind caught his scarf. You learn to read objects in my old trade. People are only objects that lie. I should tell you what the old trade was, because everything that happened hangs off it. From 1981 to 2015, I worked at Wexford and Marsh Precision, an aerospace supplier off the Tyburn Road, turbine components mostly, parts the public never sees and their lives depend on absolutely. I started as a grinder and finished as senior quality inspector, which meant that for the last 19 years my signature was the last thing between a machined part and an aeroplane. I could measure 1/1000th of a millimeter with my thumbnail and be within 10% of the gauge. I'm not boasting. I'm establishing the witness's credentials, as the barrister said to me, much later in a different building. Wexford and Marsh went to administration in 2015. 40 minutes notice, padlock on the gate by lunchtime. 61 years old, a widow 4 years by then, my Ray went with his lungs, foundry man, and I discovered what the world thinks a 61-year-old woman's precision is worth, which is nothing an agency will return a call about. I applied for inspection jobs for a year and a half. I got 2 interviews. At the second one, a boy of 30 looked at my folder of certifications like I'd handed him a fossil and asked, gently, kindly, terribly, whether I was comfortable with computers. I'd been programming coordinate measuring machines since before his mother met his father. I said yes, thank you, I manage. I didn't get it. So, nights, a green tabard, a mop trolley with a squeaking caster. I oiled myself because nobody else ever would, and the Bellamy building, which at least had the decency to be full of machines. And the locker. We each got one in the basement corridor by the plant room, gray steel, a vent, a stiff key. Mine had 1 photograph taped inside the door and 1 photograph taped outside it, and the one outside is the reason you're hearing this story at all, so I'll tell you what it was. It was Daniel, my son, my only, 24 years old in the picture, in his paramedic's uniform on the day he qualified, hat under his arm because he said the hat made him look like a bus conductor, laughing at something his cousin shouted from behind the camera. He has my mother's eyes and Ray's daft grin, and he is holding his certificate upside down on purpose. He was killed on the M42 in the early hours of the 9th of February, 2017, driving home off a night shift by a lorry driver who had falsified his rest logs. Daniel was the only one hurt. He was strong and healthy and 26 by then, and he had signed the organ donor register at 17, the same week as his provisional license, because that was Daniel. He did the serious things quickly and quietly and then made a joke so you wouldn't fuss. I'm going to say the next part plainly because I've learned there's no way to say it that doesn't hurt, so it may as well be short. They kept him on the machines for 2 days while it was arranged. I sat with him. On the 11th of February, they took him to theater, and my son, who spent 4 years bringing strangers back from the edge of things, went on doing it after he'd gone over the edge himself. His heart went to a man in his 40s. His kidneys went 2 ways, his liver another. Somebody sees through his corneas. I know the recipients only as letters and ages on a page the transplant service sent me, and for a long time I couldn't look at that page, and then for a longer time I couldn't stop. There were letters the first 2 years. The transplant people passed them along, no names allowed. 3 letters came from the heart. The first one I couldn't open for a month, and when I did it was typed, formal as a bank, thanking me for an immeasurable gift, a phrase I disliked, because I have spent my whole life measuring, and I could have told him exactly what the gift measured. 5'11", 13 stone, size 10 boots, terrible at parallel parking, saying in the car. The second letter was shorter and stranger, like something written at 3 in the morning. It said he had not been a good man before and was trying to learn how to be one, and that he was frightened of wasting what he'd been given. The third was 2 lines. It said, "I don't know how to do this. Forgive me." They were signed, all 3, just M. I never wrote back. I want to be honest about that, since I'm asking you to trust me as a witness. I sat down to write back 11 times. What stopped me wasn't anger. It was that every draft turned into a description of Daniel, and I couldn't bear to finish one, because finishing felt like closing a valve. So M stopped writing, as anyone would, and the file went in the bureau, and I taped the qualification day photo to my locker at every job I had after that, because a person has to keep her books somewhere, and my locker door was where I posted my one unpayable debt. 231 mornings then. Now let me tell you about the blue dots, because while the ghost was not noticing me, I was noticing something else entirely. Bellamy Medical Systems makes implantable cardiac devices. Valve frames, pacemaker leads, and their flagship, the thing that built the tower, the thing on the posters in reception with a silver-haired actor playing golf, a transcatheter heart valve called the Meridian. The delicate assembly happens in clean rooms I never entered, but the machined components, the nitinol frames and delivery housings, came through a floor I cleaned every night. Goods inward inspection and the QC lab, 3rd floor, east side. A quality lab at 2 in the morning tells you the truth about a company the way a till roll tells you the truth about a shop. For my first 8 months, Bellamy's lab told me a story I liked. Calibration stickers in date, gauges racked properly. Non-conforming parts, the rejects bagged in red-tagged bins, quarantined behind a cage, logged on a sheet that somebody clearly took seriously. I used to look at that cage while I mopped and feel something between envy and homesickness. Whoever ran days up there knew their trade. Then in the spring, the story changed. It changed in small ways first. The way these things always do, nobody walks in and burns the ledger, they just start rounding. The red tag bin stopped filling. Not because parts stopped failing. I could see the test station counters and the throughput hadn't dropped. The quarantine cage log showed fewer entries per week, then fewer still. And one night in April, wiping down the benches, I found a scrap component behind the CMM plinth where it had rolled, a Meridian frame housing. And I will tell you exactly what I saw because I signed a statement about it later and I don't deviate. A hairline finish crack at the weld shoulder, the kind you'd catch under 10 times magnification or a dye pen test, the kind that doesn't matter at all until metal fatigue decides it matters completely. And on its edge, a small blue paint dot. I'd seen blue dots before. Not at Bellamy, at Wexford and Marsh, in 1993, when we caught a night shift charger hand doing the identical thing. A blue dot, or a scratch, or a nick of marker pen, is how someone privately marks a part they've pulled out of the reject stream, so they can recognize it after it's been washed and refed into the good bins. Inspectors call it laundering, same as money. You launder rejects when your yield numbers are being beaten out of you by somebody upstairs, and you tell yourself the failures were marginal, overcautious, within engineering intent. There is a whole seductive language for it, and mostly, for a while, nothing happens, because safety margins are generous and God is patient. And then an aeroplane or a heart gets the one part where the margin and the flaw meet. I stood in that lab at 2:30 in the morning holding a cracked valve housing with a blue dot on it, and I want you to understand that my first feeling was not outrage. It was the old cold settling of the inspector's stomach, a sensation I hadn't felt in 9 years and had missed like a lost sense. Something on this page is lying, my old chief used to say. Find its friend. Because a laundered part never travels alone. I did not take the part. Taking it would have been theft, and worse, it would have been evidence handled by a cleaner, which is evidence ruined. I photographed it where it lay, my phone, date stamp on, a 2-pence piece beside it for scale because I had no rule in my pocket, and I put it back exactly, and I started a notebook. Spiral bound from the corner shop, which would have scandalized my old chief, but you use the gauge you've got. What could a night cleaner document without touching, without trespassing, without opening a single drawer she wasn't paid to dust? More than you'd think. Bin levels, photographed nightly, same angle, same time. A falling reject rate nobody had engineered a reason for. The quarantine logs visible page through the cage mesh. Entries thinning from 11 a week to 4 to 1. Serial prefixes on the trays staged for cleanroom transfer, which I could read while wiping the rack, and here was the friend my chief promised, because twice in May I logged a serial prefix in the good parts staging that I had photographed in the red tag bin the week before. Same batch, same numbers. Parts do not resurrect themselves. Somebody was working the cage after the day shift went home, and I even knew roughly when, because on Tuesdays and Thursdays the lab's air smelled of a particular vanilla vape that did not belong to anyone on nights, for the excellent reason that on those nights, officially, nobody was there at all. By June I had 40 pages, and on the 14th of June at 6:30 in the morning, I did the correct thing, the procedural thing, the thing that 34 years of doing it properly told me to do. I reported it. I want the next part told at full length, because everybody who has ever been at the bottom of a building knows this part, and skipping it would flatter the world. I couldn't report to Bellamy directly. I wasn't Bellamy's staff. I was employed by Facility Corp, the contract cleaner, and Facility Corp's rulebook was 1 page long. Cleaners observe, cleaners do not interpret. My supervisor, Karen, was a decent, exhausted woman running 9 buildings off one phone, and when I showed her 3 photographs, she held the phone at arm's length and said, "Iris, love, I don't even know what I'm looking at. Bins. I'm looking at bins." You're looking at rejected heart valve components going back into circulation. According to who? According to 34 years of me. Karen rubbed her eyes with finger and thumb. You were an inspector, I know, and I was nearly a dancer. Iris, if I ring Bellamy and tell them my night cleaner thinks their laboratory is bent, do you know what happens? They ring Facility Corp, and Facility Corp asks which cleaner, and by Friday you're moved to the shopping center in Dudley and I'm short-handed. That's the whole story, start to finish. Leave it, please, for both of us. I didn't leave it. I filled in Bellamy's own confidential quality concern form. There was a poster about it in the stairwell, see it, say IT, with a smiling woman pointing at a hazard cone, and posted it in the box outside HR. I know it was collected, because I emptied the recycling 2 floors up and found the box's contents a fortnight later, and I recognized my own handwriting even torn in half. I wrote a letter then, proper and formal and signed, to the Director of Quality Assurance, a Mr. R. Fenwick. And that was how I learned who owned the vanilla vape, because 3 nights later Roy Fenwick himself came up to the 3rd floor at 11 at night. A big, warm-mannered man with a golf club handshake he did not offer me, and stood in the lab doorway watching me mop for a while, jovially, the way a cat is jovial. "You're the letter writer." He picked up a gauge block, tossed it, caught it. Nobody who respects gauge blocks tosses them. "Iris, is it? Iris. Between us, I've been in medical devices 22 years. Everything you've seen has an explanation you don't have the context for. Concessions, deviations, engineering dispositions. There's paperwork behind that cage you've never been shown because, no offense, why would you be?" He set the block down a centimeter off its mark, which told me more about him than his file ever did. "You do a lovely job on these floors. My advice is do that job, because the other thing about contract staff, Iris, is that access to a regulated area is a privilege, and privileges get reviewed." "Mr. Fenwick," I said, ringing the mop. "In 1993, a charge-a-hand at my old works marked laundered rejects with a blue paint dot so he could find them again after washing. Yours does the same. You want to tell him that's how we caught ours." Something went over his face, not fear yet, fear came later. This was just recalculation, a man moving a person from one column to another. Then the warmth again, wider than before. "Good night, Iris, mind those floors." The following Monday, Fassily Corp moved me off the 3rd floor, basement and lobby only. Corinne wouldn't meet my eye when she told me. She squared the rota sheets on her clipboard twice and said, "It's come from the client." I did say, "Love." I did say. So there I was, July, demoted to my own locker corridor. 40 pages of spiral notebook and photographs that no one with authority would look at, in a building whose flagship product I now believed with an inspector's certainty, which is a specific, evidence-shaped thing and not a feeling, was going out the door with laundered parts in it, into hospitals, into chests. And you're waiting, I know, for the morning with the photograph. It came on the 3rd of August, and the ridiculous truth is that it took a fire alarm to arrange it. 6:45, a Thursday. Contractor working on the risers set the alarm off, whole building out or down, and Marcus Bellamy, who I later learned was under doctor's orders about crowds and lift shafts and cardiac patients and evacuations, was walked down the back stair by his security man and out through the basement corridor. My corridor. I was at my locker, changing my shoes at shift's end, door open. He went past me the way he went past everything, coat over arm, 232nd time, and then he stopped, between one step and the next, as if the corridor had run out of floor. His security man went 2 paces before he noticed he was alone. Marcus Bellamy was looking at my locker door. At Daniel, hat under his arm, certificate upside down, laughing. I have tried in the years since to describe what happened to that man's face, and the closest I've got is this. It was the face of someone who has walked past a mirror in a stranger's house and seen the wrong person reflected. The color went out of him from the top down. His hand came up and flattened against his breastbone. The wallet check, the one I'd cataloged 200 times without knowing what it was, and pressed there hard. And he said, in a voice with nothing left in it but air, "Who is that?" "My son," I said, "Daniel." "Daniel." He said it like a word in a language he'd been studying alone for years and was pronouncing aloud to a native for the first time. He was gripping the locker's edge now. His security man started forward. Bellamy stopped him with 2 fingers, not looking. "Your son, is he where is?" "He died, February 2017. He was a paramedic." The corridor's strip light hummed. The alarm was still ringing somewhere above us, and neither of us was in the building where the ringing was. "The 9th of February, Marcus Bellamy said, not a question. The mop I was holding became, briefly, the only thing keeping the earth in its usual place. because I had never told anyone in that building the date. It isn't a thing you drop into the tarot. There was one category of stranger on this planet who would know that date the way he'd said it, who would have it the way you have your own birthday, stitched in, unlosable. And I stood in my green tabard, 63 years old, in a basement corridor with a fire alarm ringing, and did the only arithmetic of my life that ever made my hands shake. The 11th, I said. The 9th was the accident. The 11th of February was when it was arranged. Where were you on the 11th of February 2017, Mr. Bellamy? He looked at me then, properly, first time in 232 mornings, and I watched him see it. The eyes in the photograph and the eyes in front of him. My mother's eyes, mine, Daniel's, one set closed and two still open. Papworth, he said. The 11th of February 2017, I was at Royal Papworth Hospital. His hand was still flat on his chest, and now I understood it had been a checked wallet all along, all those mornings, all those years. I signed my letters M, he said. You never wrote back. I assumed, I told myself, the family, and there he stopped, because the sentence had nowhere to go that wasn't the two of us in a basement on either side of a photograph. And then I set this down because it's true, not because it's kind. Marcus Bellamy straightened up, told his security man we're done here, and walked out of the corridor without another word to me. Yes, that's what he did, ran. And I went home on the 94 bus with the whole sky turned over and heard nothing from him for 6 days. And if you want a story where the rich man weeps in the basement and everything mends in a morning, you're on the wrong channel, love. People aren't machined that way. The letters had already told me who he was. I don't know how to do this. Forgive me. A man can hold the entire market for courage in one field and be flat broke in another. I know because I'd had 11 goes at answering 3 letters and posted none, and my own account in that currency was hardly flush. 6 days. Then, on the Wednesday night, at 1:30 in the morning, the lift at the end of my corridor opened, and the ghost came down to the basement in his shirt sleeves. No coat, no phone, no security, carrying, of all the objects in England, 2 mugs of tea, one of which he'd made wrong in every particular, and he stood there holding them like a man delivering an apology to a country whose customs he'd read about but never visited. I've had 6 days, he said, of my people telling me the appropriate way to approach the situation, family liaison, protocols, a donor-recipient meeting facilitated through the proper channels in a neutral setting with a counselor present. He looked at the tea. I dislike neutral settings. I got well in one and it took years. Mrs. Cole, Iris, I have carried your son up 40 flights of this building. I'd like 10 minutes at your locker, if I may, and I'd like you to tell me who he was, because I have read his weight in grams on a surgical report, and I know nothing at all that matters. So I told him. Sat on the plantroom bench in a basement at 2 in the morning, tea going cold, alarm panel blinking its green all's well. I told a billionaire that his heart was terrible at parallel parking, that it sang in cars badly, one register too high, with total commitment, that it once carried a drunk man a quarter-mile through snow to the ambulance because the trolley wheel had seized, and gave the man its gloves, and caught a chill so foul I had to steam it over a bowl like a Christmas pudding, that its last text to its mother was a photograph of a fox it had seen outside the depot, no caption, because it knew none was needed between us. He listened the way I imagine he'd never once listened in a boardroom, hands wrapped round his own mug, absolutely still, and when I finished he was quiet for a long time and then said, I sold pension products before. Did you know that, before this? Aggressively. I was, by every metric I now use, a bad man in a good suit. Then a virus ate my heart muscle in 14 months and I sat in Papworth listening to a machine do my living for me, and I made the kind of vows people make. Most men forget them by the first annual review. He turned the mug. I built this company because a stranger's heart was in my chest and I couldn't think of anything else big enough to owe. Every valve we ship, And he pressed his hand flat to his breastbone, the old gesture, and I watched him choose honesty over the speech. I thought I was keeping the vow. I've been signing the letters M for 9 years, Iris. I never learned to finish one. And here you see it coming, and I saw it coming that night on the bench, and it sat between us like a third mug of tea. Here was the terrible geometry of the thing. Because the vow he thought he was keeping was going out the loading dock with blue dots on it. I could have let the moment be soft. I'd earned a soft moment. God knows he had too. But my son did the serious things quickly and quietly, and his heart was 4 feet away from me, and somewhere out there were chests waiting for meridian valves the way his chest had waited in Papworth, and I have never in my life passed a part I knew was cracked. "Mr. Bellamy," I said, "before you go up, there's something in this building you have to see, and you're not to tell me you'll pass it to the appropriate people, because I've met your appropriate people, and one of them vapes vanilla in your quality lab on Tuesday nights while he launders your rejects." He went very still, a different stillness, the boardroom one arriving in the basement. "Say that again." Slowly. I gave it to him standing at my locker, spiral notebook open against the steel, and he took it the way I'd learned he took everything true and bad. No interruptions, no wounded founder theater, one question at a time, each one the right one. The bin levels dated, the cage log thinning. The serial prefixes resurrected from red tag to staging. He stopped me there and had me show him the 2 photographs side by side, May the 8th and May the 15th, same prefix, and he stood looking at them for the length of 10 heartbeats, which I could nearly hear. The blue dots and what they were for, 1993 and now. Fenwick's visit. The torn form in the recycling. Dudley, nearly. 40 pages, he said at last. 43. And your evidence chain is photographs in place, undisturbed, date-stamped with scale references. It wasn't praise. It was a man confirming load-bearing walls. Who trained you? Wexford and Marsh Precision. Aerospace. 19 years signing off flight-critical parts. Your recruiters would have found it on the CV I sent your company in 2016. I've still got the rejection. Dear applicant. He looked at me, green tabard, worn shoes, 63, and I watched a man calculate the full cost of an unexamined lobby, 11 months of it, mornings times contempt, and to his lasting credit he didn't flinch off the sum. The alarm on the 3rd of August, he said slowly, was the single most profitable event in this company's history. Iris, if the frames are compromised, the fatigue risk is downstream, implanted, in people. In people, I said, and then because it had to be said in the open in words once. In you, one day, if that valve of yours ever needs revising. You've been carrying my boy on a product line Roy Fenwick's been rounding. That's the whole of it. That's why you're going to do this properly and not quietly, whatever the shipment targets say, whatever the board says. He held out his hand for the notebook. Then he stopped, corrected himself, and held out both hands flat, the way you receive something from an inspector, the way, though he couldn't have known it, parts were handed to me across a bench for 34 years. "Mrs. Cole," said Marcus Bellamy, "will you please come upstairs?" What happened over the next 9 weeks has been written up since in trade journals and one very dry regulatory notice, and none of the write-ups mention a locker, so consider this the corrected edition. Bellamy did not hand my notebook to his quality department, for the sound reason that his quality department was the crime scene. He brought in outside auditors on 48 hours' notice, dye-penetrant and CT scanning on retained samples from 11 batches, and my blue dots turned out to be the least of it. The rot ran back 7 months, to the quarter Fenwick's bonus was restructured against yield. 9 batches were affected. Everyone was traced. Shipments stopped the same week, at a cost his finance director described in a meeting I was extraordinary sentence present for as catastrophic, and Bellamy replied in the flat basement voice, "Catastrophic is the other thing. This is just expensive." The regulator was notified before the board was, which I'm told is not the customary order. Hospitals were contacted, implanted patients monitored, and because the margins in the design were honest even where Fenwick wasn't, no one, I set it down with more gratitude than any other line in this account, no one was harmed. God is patient, and this time patience was enough. Fenwick was suspended the first morning and prosecuted within the year. At his trial, the defense made much of the fact that the case originated with, as the barrister put it, a contract cleaner of pensionable age with no access rights to the areas concerned. And I stood in the box in my Navy interview suit, 12 years old and still good, while he asked whether I seriously expected the court to accept the technical judgment of a woman employed to mop floors. No, I said. I expected to accept the technical judgment of a senior quality inspector with 34 years in flight-critical components, who was mopping floors because your client's industry stopped returning her calls at 61. The mop was the disguise, sir. Nobody chose it but you. The courier of my trade, Quality World, they print it monthly, put that on a pull-quote page framed. Corinne's got it up in the Facility Corp office of all places. She cried when I left and told me she really had nearly been a dancer, and I believe her. The world is full of us. Because I did leave. Bellamy Medical Systems has, as of that autumn, a director of quality culture, a job Marcus invented, I suspect, in the lift on the way up from the basement, whose office is on the 3rd floor, east side, whose gauge blocks nobody tosses twice, and whose first act was a standing rule that every quality concern form is answered in writing within 5 days by name, no matter whose handwriting it arrives in. The cage log is electronic now and audit locked. The red tag bins fill honestly. And 4 times a year I take the new inspection trainees down to the basement corridor, past my old locker which I've kept, and I show them a photograph of a young man holding his certificate upside down, and I tell them, every part you pass goes into somebody's someone. Measure like it's his. Marcus and I have tea on the 11th of February every year at my kitchen table, because he dislikes neutral settings, and so, it turns out, he brings the biscuits and makes the tea wrong in every particular, and I've stopped correcting him, which Ray would tell you is the highest honor I award. The first year before he left, he stood in my hallway a long moment with his coat over his arm, and then he asked the way Daniel used to ask serious things, quickly, quietly, whether I would like to hear it. I put my ear against a billionaire's chest in my own hallway, and I listened to my son's heart, 31 years old now and singing along in there. One register too high, with total commitment, still terrible at parking, still doing its rounds, still bringing strangers back from the edge of things. Steady as a gauge, dead on tolerance. I'd have signed it off anywhere.